Her own husband betrayed her in a way no enemy could. Samuel Ross didn't just break vows. He sold Clara Lane like a coin to settle his gambling debts. In the same room where once they whispered dreams of a future, he shoved her down hard, breath thick with whiskey and rage. His words cut worse than any blade. "You ain't my wife anymore," he spat. "You're my payment tonight. You'll settle what I owe. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below." The door creaked open and another man stepped inside, reeking of liquor, his grin sharp and cruel. Without hesitation, he grabbed Clara by the hair, tearing away the last scrap of cloth on her body. Her tears didn't even fall. They froze inside her, shock holding them back. She wasn't a wife anymore, not even a woman, just flesh traded like cattle. The wall seemed to close in, heavy with sweat and smoke. His breath pressed against her cheek as his voice slithered. "You're mine now. Paid for and owned." But fate had left her one chance. By the fireplace leaned an iron poker, blackened by years of ash. Its metal caught the dim glow of the firelight. With the last thread of strength in her, Clara's hand shot out. Her scream split the room as she swung with every ounce of desperation. The sound of iron striking bone cracked through the house like a rifle shot. Blood sprayed across the sheets, hot and wild. The man's body collapsed, twitching once before it went still. Clara froze, chest pounding, the poker dripping red in her grip. Had she killed him? She couldn't tell. She didn't dare wait. Panic clawed through her chest, driving her to the door. Naked, trembling, she snatched a splintered board from a broken crate and pressed it against herself, stumbling into the desert night. The cold air hit like a knife. Stones and thorns shredded her feet until blood traced every step, but she kept running. Behind her, she left a burning memory, her husband's betrayal, a stranger's violence, a pool of blood she wasn't sure meant death. To look back was to die, so she didn't. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs buckled. At last, she collapsed near a dry stone well at the edge of a lonely ranch. Through blurred vision, she saw a man, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, his face carved by years that had seen more hardship than joy. She scrambled back, clutching the wooden board tighter to her chest, her voice cracking into a scream. Don't touch me." The man didn't. He didn't move fast or speak harshly. He only pulled the shirt off his own back and draped it gently over her shaking shoulders. His voice came low and steady, the kind of voice that could steady a horse in a storm. "Ain't nobody hurting you no more, darlin'." In that moment, Clara's world shifted. The desert night no longer felt endless. The darkness no longer as cruel. Yet inside her chest, one question gnawed sharp. Had she killed the man she struck down, or was he alive somewhere behind her, already on her trail, ready to drag her back into hell? The ranch house breathed with the kind of silence that lets you hear every ember crackle in the fireplace. Clara lay on a small cot tucked against the wall, Elijah's shirt hanging loose on her shoulders. The cloth smelled faintly of smoke and leather, a scent strangely safer than anything she'd known in years. For the first time since that night began, her body wasn't running, though her mind still sprinted circles in the dark. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the swing of the iron poker, the way the blood splattered the wall. Her chest jolted, her breath broke, and she'd bolt upright, clutching the blanket as though it could shield her from memory. The words tumbled from her lips like a prayer, too cracked to rise. "I killed him. I killed him. God forgive me." Her voice shattered the quiet. A tin cup by the bed rattled and spilled, water soaking into the floorboards. From the other room, Elijah stepped in, his heavy boots steady against the wood. He didn't rush toward her. He didn't scold or tell her to hush. He just stood in the firelight, his face weathered, eyes lined with years of storms and loss. Clara's words spilled faster, broken, frantic. "I didn't mean to. I only wanted him off me." There was blood everywhere. Too much blood. I can't remember if he moved. I don't know if he breathed. Did I kill him? Did I? She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking, braced for judgment. Her whole body waited for the blow of condemnation, for the righteous anger she thought must come. But Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't call her wicked or sinner. He knelt slow until his eyes were level with hers. His voice carried low and calm, the way a man talks to a horse that's about to bolt. Sometimes, he said, steady as stone, surviving don't make you guilty. Her sobs hitched. She looked at him through blurred lashes, stunned by the gentleness in his tone. He wasn't excusing what happened, but he wasn't damning her either. His words laid over her trembling like a warm blanket. Her breath slowed. Her hands dropped a little from her face. She searched his expression for anger and found none. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone saw her without disgust, without claim, without shame. Outside, coyotes sang in the distance, a haunting song against the desert night. Inside, the soft glow of a kerosene lamp washed across Clara's young face, torn between horror and fragile relief. Guilt gnawed deep, but Elijah's presence dulled its sharpest edges. In a whisper so faint she hardly knew she'd spoken, she asked, "What if he's still alive? What if he comes for me?" Elijah's gaze didn't waver. His words carried a weight heavier than any oath. "Then you ain't fastened it alone." The promise hung in the room, simple yet fierce. Her tears slowed, her body leaning, not away from the silence, but into it. For the first time since she ran barefoot through the dark, she didn't feel like prey. Yet in the deepest corner of her mind, the question still coiled tight. Was the man she struck lying dead in that room, or was he already bleeding his way toward her trail? The night hadn't yet left the sky when the thud of boots hit the porch. The door burst open without a knock. Samuel Ross filled the frame, his eyes bloodshot, his face twisted with drink and rage. The husband who had traded his wife as if she were nothing more than a stack of cards now stood glaring, bigger than her nightmares, more real than the memory of blood on the floor. Clara's breath caught in her chest. The cot felt like a trap, the walls too close. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand fisting in her hair, yanking her backward with a snarl. "You're my wife," he shouted, spit hot on her face. "And you're coming home with me, dirty or not." Her cry cracked through the house, her hands clutching Elijah's shirt tighter to her body, as if it were a shield. Her eyes darted toward the old rancher, the only steady ground left in her storm. Elijah rose from his chair, slow as dawn. He didn't lunge. He didn't shout. The scrape of wood against the floor carried more weight than any yell. His boots fell heavy, deliberate. His voice, when it came, was quiet but cut sharper than a blade. "Let her go." Samuel's grip tightened, his other hand swinging back, ready to strike. But before it could fall, Elijah's arm reached above the fireplace. His hand closed on a pistol older than both of them, worn from war, but still true. He brought it down steady, the barrel leveled at Samuel's chest. "You lay another hand on her," Elijah said, his voice as firm as stone, "and I swear to God, I'll end the Ross name tonight." The room went still. Samuel froze, his raised hand trembling midair. His rage turned into hesitation when he looked into Elijah's eyes. There was no bluff in them, no mercy either. Samuel shoved Clara aside and staggered back toward the door, his voice breaking with fury. "This ain't over, old man." The door slammed behind him, rattling the walls. Silence rushed in, broken only by Clara's shaking breath. She clutched Elijah's shirt to her chest, her tears running hot down her cheeks. Elijah lowered the pistol, set it gently back on the mantel, and turned away. No gloating, no speeches, only a man who had drawn his line and would not be moved. Clara's voice broke in a whisper, fragile as glass. "You saved me again." Elijah poured her a glass of water and slid it across the table. He said nothing more. His quiet filled the space where fear had lived, and for the first time in years, Clara felt a thin thread of safety, though her body still shook. But in the silence, one truth hung heavy in the air. Samuel wasn't finished, and neither, it seemed, was fate. The morning sun stretched across the desert, pulling long shadows over Elijah's ranch. Clara stood near the window, Elijah's shirt still wrapped around her frame, her bare feet resting on the rough wood floor. The silence of dawn pressed heavy on her chest, but it shattered when she heard the rhythm of hooves cutting across the dirt road. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She knew that sound. Trouble was riding in. Elijah stepped onto the porch, calm as ever, his body steady in the pale light. Clara lingered behind the doorway, her hands gripping the fabric at her collar like it might keep her from breaking apart. Dust swirled as two riders came into view. At the front was Samuel Ross, his eyes red with anger, mouth already twisted in a sneer. Behind him rode a man Clara didn't know, but the badge pinned to his chest caught the sun. The sheriff. Her blood turned to ice. Samuel wasted no breath. He jabbed a finger toward her, his voice loud, desperate. "That's my wife." She ran off, and this old fool's hiding her. "Arrest him. Bring her back where she belongs." Clara's stomach dropped so hard she thought her knees might give. The word wife struck her like a slap, as if she were still nothing more than his property. She clutched the shirt tighter, fury burning beneath her fear. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out into the open. "He sold me. He sold me to pay his debt." The words tore the morning wide open, hanging sharp in the air. Samuel's face went scarlet, rage pulsing, but he didn't get a chance to spit back. The sheriff stayed seated high in his saddle, his eyes locked not on Clara, not on Samuel, but on Elijah. Recognition flickered in his gaze. His jaw shifted as though pulling memory from long ago. Elijah didn't speak. He just stood, quiet, steady, his eyes narrowing like a man bracing for whatever storm came next. At last the sheriff's voice came, low and sure. "I remember Cold Harbor. Mud up to our knees. Bullets raining down. I remember a hand pulling me out when the Rebs were ready to finish the job." His eyes never left Elijah. "That hand was yours." He pointed straight at him. "I ain't forgot." The words cut the ground out from under Samuel. His mouth opened, but nothing true came out, only bluster. "She's mine, he's stealing her." But the sheriff's hand dropped slow onto the butt of his revolver, and that said more than words ever could. His tone hardened. "A man who sells his wife don't own her anymore. Touch her again, and I'll bury you myself." The desert seemed to hold its breath. Samuel's boots shifted in the dirt, his face tight with fury, but there was nothing left in him to fight against two men who weren't bending. His bluster shrank, stripped away like smoke in the wind. He spat into the dust, his voice breaking. "This ain't over." Yet even he must have known the fight had bled out of him. He pulled himself up on his horse, smaller than he'd ever looked, and turned away. The sheriff gave Elijah a small nod before wheeling his horse. "You keep her safe. The law won't trouble you here." With that, he rode off, leaving Samuel trailing behind, humiliated, furious but beaten. Clara stood in the doorway, every muscle trembling, but she wasn't cowering this time. Her chin lifted, her eyes followed Samuel with something close to defiance. The man who had traded her like livestock had been told plain he no longer owned her. For the first time, the law had not turned its back. Her chest rose, tight with something she hadn't dared feel in years. Hope. Inside, Elijah returned to his chair like the storm hadn't touched him at all. He poured black coffee into a tin cup and sipped without a word. Clara watched him, her throat tight, her eyes damp with gratitude. He hadn't asked for her story. He hadn't asked for anything. But in his silence, she found a strength she didn't know she could lean on. Still, beneath the calm, the desert carried secrets, and deep in her bones Clara wondered if Samuel's shadow was truly gone, or if it was only circling, waiting to fall again. The days that followed moved slower than the desert sun. Clara stayed on Elijah's ranch, her bare feet learning the worn boards of the porch, her hands finding new rhythms in chores she had never done before. Feeding chickens, carrying buckets of water that sloshed and spilled against her legs, stacking firewood until her arms ached. At first, every sound outside made her flinch. The distant gallop of hooves, a rider passing on the horizon, even the rustle of wind through the dry grass set her heart racing. But each evening, when the sky burned orange and the coyotes called, Elijah's steady presence kept the shadows from swallowing her whole. He never pressed her with questions. never demanded to hear her story again. He moved through the days with a calm patience that unsettled her at first, because men in her life had always wanted something in return. Elijah didn't. He gave her space, and in that silence, she found herself returning piece by fragile piece. Some nights, sitting at the rough kitchen table with the firelight between them, she would hear herself laugh, soft, surprised, like the sound belonged to someone else. Other nights, her eyes would lift to Elijah across the table, and she'd see not just an old rancher, but a safe harbor she'd thought couldn't exist anymore. Yet, even as her hands healed from blisters and her voice found a steadier tone, fear still whispered in the quiet corners of her mind. Samuel's threats echoed in her memory. The splash of blood against the wall haunted her dreams. She would wake gasping, convinced she heard boots on the porch, convinced a shadow moved just beyond the window. In those moments, she would clutch Elijah's old shirt tighter around her, as if the fabric alone could shield her. One evening, while the desert wind scratched against the shutters, Clara sat by candlelight at the table long after Elijah had gone to bed. The small flame trembled with every draft, and her hand trembled with it as she held a stub of pencil. A torn scrap of paper sat before her, waiting. She stared at it until the words inside her chest clawed their way out. Slowly, she wrote, "You saved me, Elijah. But if I stay, he might come for you too. I can't let my danger become yours. I'll come back when I can stand without bringing harm to your door." Her eyes blurred with tears, but her hand stayed steady as she folded the note. She laid it on the table and placed his shirt neatly beside it, the fabric that had covered her when she had nothing. For a long moment, she stood in the doorway, looking back at the warm light of the fire flickering in the hearth. It was the closest thing to home she had felt in years. Her throat closed, but she forced herself to step into the night. The desert swallowed her figure as she walked away, the wind tugging at her hair, her bare feet carrying her into darkness once more. Each step felt like tearing skin from bone, but she believed leaving was the only way to protect him. Better that she suffer the road again than bring Samuel's fury onto the man who had given her nothing but kindness. When Elijah found the note the next morning, the house felt emptier than he thought four walls could. He sat at the table with the paper in one hand, the shirt in the other. The candle had burned low, wax hardened into the wood. His weathered fingers gripped the fabric as though holding on to more than cloth. He didn't chase after her. He didn't curse the choice. He only sat in silence, his jaw set, his heart heavy. With a voice softer than the morning breeze, he murmured words no one else would hear. "She came to me with nothing, and somehow left me with everything." Her absence filled the house louder than her presence ever had. And in that emptiness lay a truth Elijah carried like a wound. Sometimes the most broken souls carry the brightest spark, and even when they leave you changed forever. Clara's steps carried her farther from Elijah's ranch than she thought her body could endure. The desert stretched wide, endless, with nothing but shadows of mesquite and the silver glow of the moon to guide her. Each step scraped her raw feet against rock and thorn, but she didn't turn back. She told herself she had no right to his kindness, no right to put him in danger. Still, the ache inside her chest was worse than the cuts on her soles. She had walked away from the only place that had felt like safety since her childhood. She walked away because she believed it was the only way to protect him, even if it meant tearing herself apart. Nights on the desert floor were long and merciless. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering against the cold, whispering words to no one just to hear a voice in the dark. Sometimes she whispered Elijah's name, like a prayer she wasn't sure God would hear. Hunger gnawed at her belly, thirst clawed at her throat. Still, she pressed on, haunted by Samuel's voice in her memory, his threats, his fists, his claim over her life. She kept telling herself distance was her only weapon. If Samuel came for her, she would meet him far from Elijah's door. Back at the ranch, Elijah moved through the days as though carrying an invisible weight across his shoulders. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her laugh, soft, surprised, hesitant, no longer warmed the corners of the room. The chair across the table stayed empty. He caught himself setting aside an extra plate, filling a tin cup she would never drink from. Then he would stop, stare at the emptiness, and feel the kind of loneliness that pressed down harder than any storm he'd weathered on the frontier. Yet he never cursed her for leaving. He knew the kind of fear that drives a person to run. He had seen it in soldiers, in widows, in orphans. And now he saw in Clara. Some evenings he sat by the fire with her note folded in his palm, the edges worn soft from his thumb. He would read the same words again and again. "You saved me, but if I stay, he might come for you too." Each time, he felt the quiet sting of a truth she believed with her whole heart. She wasn't protecting herself by leaving. She was trying to protect him. That thought kept his anger still, even while the ache in his chest grew heavier. Clara, for her part, felt the pull of him even as she pushed forward. Each sunrise found her weaker, each night colder, but her mind returned to Elijah's steady eyes, his calm voice when the world was burning down around her. She remembered the way he had knelt in front of her, telling her surviving didn't make her guilty. No one had ever said words like that to her before. No one had ever given her space to breathe. She longed for that silence again, longed for the safety of that old shirt across her shoulders. But she forced herself to keep walking, her heart cracking with each mile of distance. The desert showed no mercy. One night, her legs gave out near a dry ravine. She curled against the dirt, whispering, "I'm sorry, Elijah. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked until it was just a rasp in the dark. Sleep came in fits, filled with dreams of blood and fire, of Samuel's snarling face, of Elijah standing silent as the law turned its back. She woke each time with tears cutting tracks down her cheeks. She kept moving, but hope thinned like smoke in the wind. Elijah, meanwhile, sat on his porch, watching the horizon each evening, as though some part of him expected to see her small figure coming back through the dust. He never said it aloud, not even to himself, but a part of him knew, once you give someone shelter in your heart, you never stop looking for them in the distance. He'd sit with his coffee cooling in his hands, whispering words into the desert air, words he'd never meant for her ears, but couldn't keep inside. "You came with nothing, Clara, but you left me with more than you'll ever know." Two souls walked separate roads, each carrying the other like a ghost that would not fade. She with guilt and fear, he with quiet sorrow, and between them stretched the desert, wide and merciless, refusing to give up its secrets of whether fate would bring their paths together again, or tear them apart for good. The desert days bled into one another. Clara's body grew thinner, her steps slower. Still, she pushed forward because she thought it was the only way to keep Elijah safe. She told herself she could survive, that she had survived worse before. But there were nights when the loneliness became too heavy, when the cold bit so deep in her bones that she shook until her teeth rattled. Those nights, she wrapped her arms around herself and whispered Elijah's name into the wind. She missed the steady sound of his voice, the way he never rushed her, the way he made the world feel less cruel without saying much at all. Back at the ranch, Elijah's life carried on, but nothing felt the same. The house was quiet, and the quiet cut sharper than noise ever could. He moved through his chores with heavy hands, his thoughts always drifting back to the young woman who had sat across his table, who had laughed softly as though she was surprised the sound still lived inside her. He didn't know if she was safe, if she was alive, or if Samuel had found her already. But he did know one thing. She had left because she thought he was worth protecting. That thought stayed with him like a thorn in his chest. Samuel Ross wasn't done. Men like him rarely were. Word spread through nearby towns of a drunk gambler looking for his wife, a man red-eyed with fury, bragging loud in saloons that he'd drag her back by her hair if he had to. Clara heard the whispers too when she passed through villages on her way. She would keep her head low, pull the shirt tighter around her, and pray she wouldn't be recognized. Each whisper fed her fear. Each rumor made her wonder how far his shadow could reach. She felt like prey again, running, hiding, never free. One afternoon, Clara found herself standing on a ridge that overlooked a wide stretch of desert. The sky was wide and merciless, the wind hot against her face. She thought of Elijah, sitting on his porch, drinking his coffee, watching the horizon like he always did. Her chest ached. She realized she wasn't only running from Samuel anymore. She was running from the only place where she had felt seen, the only man who hadn't treated her like something to own or use. The thought cut her deeper than the memory of Samuel's blows. She dropped to her knees, tears burning her eyes, and whispered, "I can't keep running forever." Elijah, miles away, sat at his table with her note folded in his pocket. He carried it everywhere now, like a piece of her he refused to let go of. He'd catch himself tracing the words with his thumb when the silence got too loud. He thought of her often, wondering if she had found safety or if the desert had taken her. He prayed she'd come back, though he never said the prayer out loud. But the desert wasn't done testing them. Late one evening, just as the sky bruised purple, Elijah heard the sound of hooves again. His hand went to the rifle by the door before he even looked. Dust rose on the horizon. Samuel Ross was riding in once more, his shoulders hunched with fury, his eyes dark with obsession. And this time, Elijah could see the kind of madness that doesn't let go until it burns everything down. Clara, miles away, felt it too. Not the sound of hooves, not the sight of Samuel himself, but the heavy truth pressing down inside her. She could not keep running forever. If she didn't face him, he would keep chasing her shadow until it swallowed not just her, but the only man who had ever shown her kindness. For the first time, the thought of turning back sparked in her chest. It terrified her, but deep down she knew freedom doesn't come from running. It comes from standing your ground. The night Samuel returned to Elijah's ranch, the desert air felt thick, like even the wind knew trouble had come. Elijah stood on the porch, rifle resting against his leg, his eyes calm but sharp. Samuel swung down from his horse, staggering with drink, hate burning in his bloodshot eyes. "She's mine," he spat. "You can't keep her from me." Before Elijah could answer, a small figure appeared on the horizon. Clara. Her feet carried her faster than she thought possible, her breath ragged, her body trembling, but her will steady. She had turned back. She had run for miles, but not away this time, toward the place she had left, toward the only man who had stood between her and despair. She stumbled into the yard, her eyes on Elijah, then shifted to Samuel. Her voice, hoarse but fierce, broke the silence. "I don't belong to you anymore." Samuel's laugh cracked like broken glass. "You always belonged to me," he snarled, stepping closer. His hand twitched toward his belt, where a pistol hung loose. Clara's heart pounded, but she didn't step back. Not this time. Her voice steadied. "You sold me. You lost me. You'll never owe me again." Elijah lifted the rifle, slow and certain. "You heard her," he said. "This ends here." The weight in his voice made even the desert go still. Samuel looked at Elijah's steady eyes, then at Clara's unshaken stare. For the first time, he seemed smaller, weaker, as though the truth had stripped the power from his threats. His hand faltered on the pistol. His breath hitched. Finally, with a curse muttered under his breath, he turned back to his horse. "You'll regret this," he spat, but the words held no fire. He climbed up and rode into the darkness, his shadow swallowed by the horizon. The yard stayed silent for a long time after. Clara's legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees, tears spilling hot across her face. Elijah laid the rifle aside and walked to her, not rushing, not crowding, just steady as he always was. He draped his coat across her shoulders and spoke low. "It's over now." She shook her head, voice breaking. "What if he comes back? Then we'll face it," Elijah said, his words slow and solid. "But you won't be fastened alone." Her sobs softened into silence. For the first time since she had fled barefoot through the desert, she felt more than safety. She felt free. Not because Samuel was gone, but because she had spoken the truth aloud, because she had stood her ground. That freedom could never be taken back. In the days that followed, Clara stayed at the ranch, but this time she wasn't just hiding. She worked. She laughed. She even sang sometimes under her breath while carrying water from the well. Elijah never demanded her gratitude, never asked her for anything, but Clara saw the way his eyes softened when she smiled, the way his shoulders eased when he heard her voice. For two broken souls, silence itself became a kind of home. And though the desert carried secrets and the future was uncertain, Clara carried something she had never carried before: hope. Not the fragile hope that things might change, but the steady hope that she had the strength to live free, and that kindness, when given without demand, could save a life as much as any weapon. The moral lived not just in Clara's survival, but in the bond she and Elijah forged. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in fighting, nor in running, but in standing beside someone who refuses to let you fall. And sometimes the most powerful kind of love is the quiet kind, the kind that asks for nothing but gives everything. When Clara looked at Elijah across the table one evening, her voice barely more than a whisper, she said the words that had been burning inside her since that first night. "You didn't just save me. You gave me back to myself." Elijah didn't answer with speeches. He only nodded once, steady as ever, his eyes saying more than words could carry. And for the first time in years, Clara believed the future might hold more than fear. It might hold freedom. It might even hold peace.